Thank you. Steve Bannon. We just talked off stage. We're going to come back and discuss Brett Kavanaugh and Nikki Haley and Trumpland later. But I thought let's begin on Europe, which is your new focus. You have the movement, founded by Michel Modric-Hamon, who I hope I pronounced right, who's a Belgian politician. Yep. And it's an attempt to bring together like-minded parties who focus on national borders, stronger borders, greater curbs on immigration, keeping radical Islam at bay. And your aim is to win a third of the votes at the EU elections next year. And you've recruited Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, and Matteo Salvini, I suppose the effective ruler of Italy, some would say, as clients. And I suppose my first question is, what precisely are you doing? What do you offer these people? Do you offer them advice? Are you trying to raise money for them? Will you give us some idea? Because that's all been a little bit cloudy so far.
When I first started getting invited over here after I left the White House to give speeches, whether it was in Switzerland or in France, I would ask people, I said, what do you want me to talk about? And every time it was one similar theme: tell us we're not alone. And I go, what do you mean you're not alone? There's other populist movements out there. There's other nationalist movements out there. And I said, well, you have these groupings in the European Parliament. I said, yeah, well, those are political groupings, but we don't really share ideas like on a global basis. And so the movement is actually not just about the EU. It's really, global in nature. Do you see things?
So it could go outside Europe?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I have a C4 in the United States that'll be part of it, right? It's really, we're trying to be the populist nationalist underpinnings of the Trump movement. We're trying to change, I've been at war with the Republican Party establishment for 9 years, trying to change the Republican Party into more of a workers' party, right? Working class and lower middle class. But we see in Brazil, you're seeing in Pakistan, you're seeing it's starting in Argentina.
So would you see Imran Khan as part of this movement?
I see Khan as potentially part of this movement as a populist. I see what's happening in Brazil as part of this populist movement. I think you're going to see it in Asia and Australia. But the first order of business was to see if we couldn't get together a club or association, loosely based, out of Brussels, where people can come together. We'll have conferences, we'll have dinners, people can have some sense of camaraderie, exchange ideas principally. On the practical side, it's not to do anything with telling political parties how they got to run their campaigns. It's also not about telling which types of groupings they're going to have in the European Parliament.
And would you raise money for them?
Well, not for individual parties, but
you'd raise money for the movement.
Yes, I've already started to raise money. I put my own money in, and I've started to raise money from Europeans, high net worth individuals, like I've done in the States, who principally come from working class backgrounds and have had the good fortune to make some money. The thing we're going to do at the movement is, like in the United States before I took over the Trump campaign or stepped in as CEO, those years of the Tea Party movement at Breitbart trying to build the building blocks. And one is, polling. So we'll do the most sophisticated polling that's ever been done for the European Parliament. I kind of got my chops following Nigel Farage around in the spring of 2014 when he was, when UKIP had this incredible run on the European parliamentary elections. I didn't know what it was. And not many people did because voter turnout's so low. So number one is to do polling. We've already retained John McLaughlin, who just did a huge poll for me in the United States on the Trump election with Pat Caddell. We'll use local pollsters, but he will set the overall architecture. He's very close to Orban. He does, I think he does Bibi's polling in Israel, so he knows Europe quite well. He'll be the overall architect. We've actually started, right? We're reaching out now to local pollsters to help us. That's number one. Number two is how to identify the voters, targeting. Particularly, in these elections, it's kind of low propensity. So we're going to really help, I think, people look where the voters are. The third is to create a war room, rapid response. I do this in the States today. Today, my C4 has a 25-person war room like we had on the Trump campaign, or like campaigns normally have, to kind of do rapid response, to see what's out there, to do talking points, to do polling, to book people on talk radio, to write op-eds. Many of the people you see on CNN or MSNBC, not so much Fox, come with our talking points or our perspective to try to combat the opposition party media. The last part is kind of helping parties, if they need it, to show how to unite grassroots organizations. Now, in Europe, this is where, particularly in Italy, the 5-star in the league, we're much more sophisticated in the United States of using Facebook and Facebook Live to really bootstrap elections. But we think that that's the fourth big thing to do. So we're actually going to provide the tools or the building blocks for victory, and those parties that want to use them can use them, and those that don't won't, but they will be available.
And so far you've got Salvini and you've got Orban, but a third one, you mentioned Farage. Would you be interested in Boris Johnson here?
Well, here's the thing with the movement is we've made a decision that Brexit's going to happen. Since, look, everything you have to kind of focus on.
Why do you think, just to push you on that,
right.
you've always said you're a populist. Here you had the vote on Brexit, where people were given a choice between staying in the European Union and leaving. But you could argue that at the time they didn't know much about what the alternative would be.
See, democracy works until the global elites start losing elections.
Yeah, but
then all of a sudden the little guy doesn't know what he's voting for.
Yeah, but then populism works until you worry about populism.
This is the
on the
perfect example of the real resistance and the nullification project. Okay? You got Brexit and Trump. They're inextricably linked. And you've had the nullification project from day one. That people didn't really understand what they were voting for in Trump or particularly in Brexit.
I wouldn't. Trump is there for 4 years. Brexit, we now fairly soon will know what the choice is. You've always believed in populism. Surely that's a thing where you put that to the popular will. So here is the choice. You now know what the choice is.
Absolutely. I could not disagree more. A vote was made by the British people to get their sovereignty back. The elected officials should have gotten on with it. As Donald Trump told the British government that came over, overshoot your target and doing a deal and get on with it. If this thing stretches out, the City of London, the corporatists, et cetera, they'll play rope-a-dope like they've done to play rope-a-dope to hopefully tire you out. Soros will start doing a campaign. Maybe we should have another vote. By the way, it's exactly what's happened with Trump. That's why this midterm is his first reelect. Because you got to remember, they're inextricably linked. The globalist apparatus is just not going to sit there with the populist movement. Whether that's right-wing populism or Bernie Sanders. They're not going to sit there and pat you on the head and say, hey, you won an election, what a great idea. Here are the keys, just do what you want.
Does that mean, I asked you whether you're advising Boris Johnson, you're advising him?
No, I know Boris. I don't think he needs advice.
And what about Le Pen? That's kind of intrigued by that.
But let me go back to Britain for a second. We decided in the movement, and particularly since we're focused on the European parliamentary elections, that the UK was going to be out. And so with Nigel and everything here, we're really not doing any effort
whatsoever. Britain's finished, it's done.
Well, later on, after the European parliamentary election, because we have so much work to do in front of us, we'll retire. I'm actually in Paris tomorrow with the Front National folks. I think I'm very close.
That would imply that Marine Le Pen, just for the audience, sort of disassociated herself somewhat for you and pointed out, showing rare perspicacity, that you were American and that this was a French election. She didn't want to have Americans involved.
Here's what I think. As an American, I'm not over here to tell anybody how to run their elections, right? This is the movement's going to be a European effort, right, with Europeans. And Europeans have to make decisions, local political parties. And they also know how to run their own elections. I think the world of Le Pen, I think the world of Front National, and I think she's absolutely correct, and we've discussed this many, many times. I'm not there to kind of impose some sort of American solution on this. But I do believe at the end of the day that Front National will be a part of the movement.
And the AfD in Germany, you think you can bring them in as well?
I hope to. We're starting discussions, preliminary discussions with a lot of these folks. I think the AfD is one of those parties that's really on the rise. I think the leadership there is just terrific. And we hope to, I'm going to have conversations with them right after I'm mostly focused on Trump's first reelect, which will happen on November 6th. But I'm taking a flight, right now I'm scheduled to take a flight from the United States on the evening of the 6th and go to Brussels and start to meet with AfD and other people.
And do you think, there's an interesting point which Le Pen kind of alluded to. You've always said you're an economic nationalist. The difficulty of constructing an alliance of different people whose only interests are their own countries, doesn't that make it much more difficult here? It'd be in America, it'd be the equivalent of having an Ohio nationalist, a Californian nationalist.
What's very different, that's what's different if you go back to Macron's speech in September of 17, if you look at Jean Monnet and the European project, I think that the natural industrial logic of that was to have a United States of Europe, where Italy would be South Carolina to France's Georgia. I think what the movement in this association is leaders, parties, and countries that want a EU that's a collection of sovereign nations, right? And I don't think economic nationalism, I think everybody looking after themselves, after they're looking after the sovereignty of their nation and their citizens' self-interest, has a cumulative good to it.
But I've looked at what you've said about sovereignty. You think that national sovereignty involves control of its military, control of your borders, and control of your currency. And I know that Orban and I know that Salvini say they do not want to leave the euro, but you personally, I'm presuming your own opinion is that those countries should leave the euro.
I think it's over time. I think this first step is to really have more of an impact of these nations, of the sovereignty movement at the EU level. What countries decide and choose later on is what they decide.
It sounds a bit like you're unusually for you
no,
chickening
no,
out.
I'm not.
Logical.
I absolutely believe. I think that's why Switzerland, I think Norway, the United Kingdom. I'm a huge believer that you should have control of your national currency. I think it's a fundamental part of economic nationalism. However, it's quite complicated, particularly when these leaders are coming in now. When the currency, you've been a joint currency for a couple of decades. You just can't wave a magic wand and say, oh, we won out. It's incredibly difficult. It's much more difficult than the exit if you just had a political exit from the EU. Also, one thing to note, I haven't met one leader in these conversations we've had. I haven't heard one leader of any party, as we've been talking, even the second and third level. I haven't heard anyone say they want to leave the EU. What they look at is a reformed EU that is more based upon a collection of individual sovereign nation states than this United States of Europe program that Macron and others have been proposing. I also happen to think that is essentially dead in the water. The populist movement, because everybody was cheering when Macron won last year, the populist nationalist movement is at the very top of the first inning. This is going to be a much, much bigger global movement, a much, much bigger movement in Europe. So we're at the very beginning of it. But no, I do believe that you need your control of your currency, and I actually am a big believer in cryptocurrencies for countries.
We'll come on the investment strategy would interest them, but just on pushing on nationalism, you know history well. This is the continent where nationalism sparked wars, sparked bloodshed, and from Ireland to the Balkans, not just at the beginning of the last century, but right the way through. And just to use one person, you look at Viktor Orban's rhetoric, which I think does recall some of those darker times. He's called Muslims invaders. He said how important it is to preserve ethnic homogeneity, and that would boost Hungary's value. And he's talked about George Soros, who, as you know, is Jewish, being part of a group of outsiders who do not fight directly but by stealth. They are not honorable but unprincipled. They are not national but international. They do not believe in work but speculate, and so on and so on and so on. And I could choose a lot of stuff in Salvini. My point to you is this is not the Midwest. This is a place where wars start, where bloodshed is. Why are you hanging out with somebody like that?
Because I think you can always cherry pick quotes from people. If you look what they're
that's fair. That is.
If you look at these individuals, they're not ethno-nationalists. They're not racist. They're not xenophobes. They're not nativist. And the more the mainstream media continues to try to smear them every day, it's just going to make their supporters more and more angry.
These are not smears. These are quotes which other people have quoted you as well.
Yeah.
I mean, they're real things
I think,
they say.
Listen, these are individuals that believe in their countries. These are individuals that are trying to keep their countries intact. These are individuals that believe in the value of citizenship. And I think what they've done is quite heroic, particularly given how off the track that this project got.
You accept that many of these areas, borders are disputed. That these are complicated places. I'm not trying to demean what happened in America at all, but this is a different thing.
And I'm not trying to simplify it either.
Yeah.
But I have tremendous faith in the common man. I have tremendous faith in the leaders that come up from, supported by populists, supported by individuals. I think to go back and continually say, oh, it was World War II, and it was all these, people in the street that did that, I think is just to miss the point. When people have control of their own destinies, they're not going to be looking at, taking on wars to fight where their sons and daughters are going to die. I think this is a positive movement. I think it's essentially been an inflection point in history. I think you're going to have much more robust communities, you're going to have much more robust countries, and you're going to have much more engaged citizenship. The globalists have to understand. And let's look at the financial crisis because that was what I still believe is what lit the fuse of this, particularly in the United States and in Europe. The elite, including many in this room, and I was part of that at Goldman Sachs, took care of itself. We basically flooded the zone with liquidity and inflated assets to save ourselves, and also had China, China be the driving engine out of that. Well, you didn't take care of, you didn't look after the little guy, the devil catch the hindmost. Okay? So the great global elites that brought on the fiasco of 2008, and quite frankly are the problems in Brazil and Argentina and Venezuela. You go around the world, right? All the globalist elites and globalist institutions.
I think Venezuela is
maybe
the communist regime run by. I mean,
but it was
that is a long way from the global elite.
But the communists took over because there were serious problems before then by the elites.
Can I ask you about? You mentioned China.
But you look to China, and you both ECB, Bank of Tokyo, Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve's balance sheet's $880 billion in the day of the financial crisis. It's $4.5 trillion when Trump takes office. You inflate your way out of there. And devil catch the hindmost. So let the little guy pay for it and let his wages not increase. The other part that got us out of here was China, right? And what we know is China is just another financial scam, right? 45 trillion, what is it, in RMB printed. They just cut up the printing press and nobody took a look at it. So now we're heading towards another financial crisis brought on by over leverage and the debacle that's going to be upon us in China very quickly. And who's to blame for that? Is the little guy? No. The little guy that put on his shoulders to pay the taxes and do the work that doesn't have asset inflation because he doesn't own real estate, doesn't own any stocks. And the millennials are going to get eviscerated. They're nothing but 19th century Russian serfs. They don't own anything. They're not going to own anything. They're already 20% down on where their parents were at the same time in life. We've effectively destroyed a generation.
Can I come back at you on Russia quickly?
Yes, sir.
One very obvious difference between America and here is that when you talk about China, in America, it resounds. Both of us know in different experiences. Here, people are much more worried about Russia. Does that not worry you to the extent that
Russia's economy is the size of New York State. It's a country in a demographic death spiral. It's got a lot of weapons and a lot of natural resources. No real innovation, no real industry. If people were so worried, and this is why Trump's been such a hero in NATO, if people were so worried, then why can NATO, the British can put up 1 combat division, the French can put up 2 combat divisions, all the rest of NATO can put up 1 combat division, okay? President Trump's got to go over there and beg guys to pay 2%. If the Germans are so concerned about Russia, I hear this all the time, you're so concerned about Russia. I was at sea hunting Soviet submarines on a destroyer in my early 20s and went back to the Pentagon as a junior officer on the war plan of President Reagan to take down the Soviet Union. And I don't need to be lectured by all these guys are saying Russia, Russia, Russia. If Germany's so concerned about Russia, where's the spending for defense? How come they don't have any combat aircraft, no tanks to stop the fall of Gav? Here's the reason. They're not worried about it. It's all nonsense. You're not worried about Russia. If you're worried about Russia, you put something into the pot for defense. You wouldn't. The NATO situation in Russia, what America First national security strategy means is that we're not looking for protectorates. We're a revolutionary country. We broke off from the greatest empire the world had ever seen, right? We're not looking for protectorates. We're looking for allies. And allies are somebody who throws something in the till, right, and has some combat readiness and has some real military if you're going to combat what the threats are. But it falls into the United States. So all this talk about Russia, Russia, Russia is empty. All I see Germany doing is cutting natural resource deals that turns over 75% of their energy to the Russians. So I think the Russians is a complete media. Completely a media blow up. And not that they're not bad guys. They're certainly bad guys, and they do bad things. You saw what they did here in London. It's a kleptocracy. They're not good guys. But correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't we destroy Nazi Germany and the fascists in Italy as ally partners with Joseph Stalin, who had already killed 30 or 35 million of his own people? And last time I looked, he was a pretty bad guy. And Churchill and Roosevelt had no problem embracing Uncle Joe to take care of the Nazis.
Let's jump a little bit from that towards Nikki Haley. What is your reading of, although she would share some of the adjectives you've used about both China and Russia, what is your reading of Nikki Haley? Why did she give up, and what will she do?
I think the timing of it is very suspect. For the first time, I've been out with these congressional House races. If President Trump, I've called this now for many months to be his first reelect. If he loses the House of Representatives, he will be impeached. They will bring impeachment hearings immediately. And so it's imperative that we keep the House. We finally started to get...
You cannot, virtually every pollster would tell you, possibly including your own polls, that looks highly unlikely.
But remember, it was. We went from 60 seats down for a blue wave to 50 to 40. I think right now it's in the range of 25 to 30, which means we have a very narrow gate. We're going to lose 20 seats regardless, but to get to that 23, there's a very narrow gate you have to go through, but it's doable. The Kavanaugh hearings gave us traction for the first time to try to, against all odds, just like in 16, to try to close strong and try to save it by a seat or two. Nikki Haley's timing was, I think, horrific because it reinforced, I think, with the Republican women that Donald Trump's somebody you don't want to back.
And do you think Nikki Haley is therefore aiming herself to be president ultimately?
I think Nikki Haley is incredibly politically ambitious. I would say ambitious as Lucifer, but that's probably a... I'm probably taking Milton out of context of that. But she's very ambitious and very talented. She's very talented.
And you think she could challenge Trump in the primaries?
I think I take Nikki Haley at her word that it's not 2020. I think she's going to go out and make some money. I just think the timing, everything that she said yesterday and everything about her stepping down could have been done on the evening of November 6th. She's going to stay to the end of the year. There's plenty of time to do a transition, plenty of time to pick someone to take her place. The timing could not have been worse because it stepped on the Kavanaugh first day at the Supreme Court. It stepped on the 50-year anniversary of the lowest. We have the lowest unemployment in 50 years. The timing was exquisite from a bad point of view. So I think I'm very suspect of the timing.
Brett Kavanaugh, you mentioned, surely that drives people towards the Democrats as well, particularly drives women voters. I know that when you saw the Me Too movement with my colleague Josh Green, you talked about this as a Oliver Cromwell moment. This is something that could change American politics and have the same kind of energizing effect, especially among Democratic-leaning women, as you had on right-leaning men.
It's the two movements I see in the world, the populist nationalists, and I think it's something more than Me Too. I call it the Time's Up movement. And this is a real going after the patriarchy, going after 5,000 or 6,000 years of power dynamics. It's quite deep. It's very powerful. Now, remember, the reason we were 50 or 60 seats down is the left now is like the Tea Party in 2010. The Time's Up movement, the resistance, and Tom Steyer's Next Generation have been doing what the Tea Party did for months. They've been ringing doorbells the old-fashioned way, walking precincts, talking to people about how Obama won in 2008 in the primaries, the old-fashioned way of doing the hard work. I disagree with these people ideologically. I admire their hustle and their grit, and they're working. So that is what we were up against. The Kavanaugh movement for the first time woke the Republicans up to the fact of look at what the future is going to be like. The Kavanaugh hearings is the future of our government if they take control of the House.
Would it have been better for Trump if Kavanaugh had not got through? That would have stirred up.
No, it was the Kavanaugh at the end, as I said, was a proxy, and this is why I praised Mitch McConnell. Kavanaugh's confirmation at the end was a proxy on Trump's presidency. It had to go through. It was all or nothing. You had to make it. It galvanized both the establishment wing of Mitch McConnell and the populist nationalist far right of Bannon and others, right? And saying, hey, we have to come together because we've seen what the future's like. The mobocracy, this kind of mob rule, and what the House is going to be every day with Jerry Nadler and these 52 investigations. They're not shy about it. They laid it out this Sunday. They've got 52 investigations. If they don't impeach Kavanaugh and they don't impeach Trump, they're coming out to grind the Trump movement to its halt. And here's why. These people are rational. They got it much quicker than the Republicans got. They understand that Donald Trump is transformative and historical. He is going to be in their lives 30 years from now. Just what he's doing on the federal judiciary with the Federalist Society and Mitch McConnell, kind of this deconstruction of the administrative state.
Do you feel the people you said you came in to protect, which you described very emotionally, those people who were left behind, who have not been, the global elites have not paid attention to, do you think Trump has changed anything in their well-being other than just the psychology of feeling someone is sticking their fingers up at the world?
No, I think you see in the economy, not just the unemployment, the wages starting to rise. I mean, it's one of the reasons the Federal Reserve keeps raising rates. You're starting to see wages rise, particularly in agriculture and oil field services and construction. Also, you're starting to see manufacturing jobs coming back. That's why NAFTA is so important. What Trump is doing is reorienting the world's supply chain back from East Asia to North America and Europe. That's why we're going to have a bilateral deal with Japan that takes care of the automotive part. And you're going to have, I think the EU is going to be part of this in this kind of geostrategic shift of the supply chain. That is going to be high value added jobs back to the heartland of this country. Remember, There's these studies that J.D. Vance cites, the guy that wrote Hillbilly Elegies, which is the best sociological take on the Trump voter. He cites these studies from Harvard and MIT. He says there's a direct correlation between the factories that left for China, the jobs that left behind, and the opioid crisis. Protectionism, tariffs are more than just taxes. They're about dignity and self-worth. It's about bringing high value-added manufacturing jobs. And here's why Trump's transformative. Until Trump came along, it was said this is like the second law of thermodynamics. The rise of China is inexorable, right? And your story on the chips shows you what's going on. It's not inexorable. It's human agency that allowed this to happen.
But do you think it's a legitimate aim of, do you think Trump has this aim of actually making sure that China never becomes the world's biggest economy? And is that a legitimate aim?
I don't think it's about that at all. I think he has a great fondness for the Chinese people, as the American people do. They were our allies in World War II. America with missionaries and money and has a great love and, I think, affinity for China. This is about a radical, reckless regime. And you've seen what they've done in your story. The Chinese Communist Party at the highest levels is reckless, okay? They're totalitarian. I did this with the Economists 3 weeks ago. The Economists had the 175th anniversary edition, and they refer to China as an illiberal society, an illiberal thing. That is dead wrong. This is a totalitarian, mercantilist, that's gamed the system, society that's gamed the system. The regimes, and as the financial crisis starts to build and the reality of what China has done, and we've looked the other way, and many people have helped them, the recklessness of what they've done financially is going to come home. The chickens are going to come home to roost, and it's going to be quite ugly.
But when you say that, just to finish on that, in Europe, does that message about China carry any weight at all? Do you feel as if people understand what you're talking about?
I do not. I think it's only starting. I think it's when I've talked to leaders and I've talked to people, I think the whole issue of how China grew, one belt, one road. China's whole foreign policy is the exact equivalent of the British East India Company. It's predatory capitalism. It's lending you money you can never pay back to take control. Okay, that is all, I think, a part of an education process. I do believe that the Europeans will start to understand about the predatory nature of Chinese capitalism, and I think that'll happen quite quickly.
One last thing, you've come here, as we said at the very beginning. You've got some people suspicious about whether American-style things can ever work here. Your first goal is the parliamentary elections, and there you hope to get a third.
At least a third. I think a third. It's kind of complicated, but it's at least a kind of a blocking.
Who do you see as your opponent in this? Do you see Jean-Claude
Juncker,
or do you see Macron?
No, Macron. They actually one of the things I think it's good that we actually reset the narrative. When we start the movement, people really were not that focused on the European parliamentary elections, what the populists could do. There was a group the other day that with Macron said that they want to start their movement on the other side. Macron has already condemned this. Macron and Merkel are the leaders. And I might add that, people talk about Trump's popularity. I think Macron's in the high 20s and Merkel's in the low 30s. So these are leaders that don't have tremendous support at home, but they are the leaders of the globalist movement here in Europe. It's going to be quite a fight. The one thing I will predict is by next spring, because this will be continent-wide, the intensity of the European parliamentary elections will be the equivalent of an American presidential election. It will be what people are talking about in cafes. It will be what people are talking about at dinner parties, et cetera. So
you've had many political achievements in your life, but if you can make European parliamentary elections exciting, then you will have possibly outdone everybody. Steve Bannon, thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Thank you.